When most people hear the words Trojan horse, they picture a giant wooden horse sitting outside the walls of Troy. Greek soldiers are supposedly hidden inside, while the Trojans celebrate what they think is the end of a 10-year war. Then, under the cover of darkness, the soldiers climb out, open the gates, and Troy falls forever. It's one of the most famous stories in history. But here's the questions historians have been asking for centuries. Did any of it actually happen? Was there really a giant wooden horse? Was the Trojan War itself even real? Or is the entire story one of the greatest myths ever told? Today we're separating legend from evidence and looking at why this story has fascinated people for over 3,000 years. This is the Trojan Horse by the 10-Minute Mentor. Let's begin with the war itself. According to ancient Greek tradition, the Trojan War began with one woman, Helen. Helen was said to be the most beautiful woman in the world and was married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. But a Trojan prince named Paris either kidnapped or, according to some versions, eloped with Helen and brought her back to the city of Troy. The Greeks saw this as a massive insult. So Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon united dozens of Greek kingdoms and sailed across the Aegean Sea with hundreds of ships to bring Helen back. Ancient writers claim nearly 1,000 ships participated. Whether that number is real is impossible to know, but according to the legend, what followed was a brutal war that lasted 10 years. Many of the most famous figures in Greek mythology fought during this conflict. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior; Hector, Troy's greatest defender; Odysseus, known not for his strength, but for his intelligence. Much of the story appears in Homer's epic poem, the Iliad. But here's something many people don't realize. The Iliad never mentions the Trojan horse. That's right. The world's most famous part of the Trojan War isn't actually in Homer's most famous poem. The Iliad ends before Troy falls. The story of the horse comes from later ancient works, especially another epic called the Odyssey, and a Roman poem written centuries later called the Aeneid by Virgil. That alone has caused historians to ask an important question. If the horse wasn't part of the earliest surviving version of the story, was it added later? According to the traditional account, after 10 long years of fighting, the Greeks couldn't break through Troy's enormous defensive walls. So Aeneas came up with a completely different strategy. Instead of attacking with weapons, he attacked with psychology. The Greeks built an enormous wooden horse. Inside, they secretly hid a group of elite soldiers. The rest of the Greek armies pretended to sail away, making it look as if they finally admitted defeat. The Trojans woke up believing they had won. Outside their city sat the strange wooden horse. One Greek soldier had intentionally stayed behind. His name was Sion. He convinced the Trojans that the horse was a sacred offering to the goddess Athena and that bringing it inside Troy would guarantee the city's protection forever. Not everyone believed him. A Trojan priest named Laocoon famously warned the people. He supposedly declared, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." Moments later, according to the legend, 2 enormous sea serpents emerged from the ocean and killed Laocoon and his sons. The Trojans interpret this as a sign from the gods that Laocoon had been wrong, so they ignored his warnings. They tore down part of their own city walls just to pull the giant horse inside. That night, after celebration filled the city, the hidden Greek soldiers climbed out. They quietly killed the guards, opened Troy's gates, and the returning Greek army sailed back under darkness. By sunrise, Troy had fallen. It's one of the greatest stories of deception in history. But did it really happen? Let's look at the evidence. For centuries, many scholars believed the Trojan horse was completely fictional. After all, almost everything people knew came from epic poems filled with gods, monsters, prophecies, and supernatural events. Then something extraordinary happened. In the late 1800s, a German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann became convinced that Troy had actually existed. Most academics laughed at him, but Schliemann traveled to modern-day northwestern Turkey and began digging at a hill called Hisarlik. What he discovered shocked the world. Beneath the ground were not one, not two, but at least 9 major cities built on top of each other over thousands of years. Each civilization had rebuilt on the same location after earlier cities were destroyed. One of those ancient cities showed signs of violent destruction around 12,000 BC. Burned buildings, collapsed walls, weapons, arrowheads, human remains. The timing closely matched the period many historians associated with the legendary Trojan War. Suddenly, Troy was no longer just mythology. It had been a real place. Today, archaeologists widely agree that the city of Troy truly existed. Its ruins can still be visited in modern-day Turkey. But proving that Troy existed is not the same as proving every legendary story about it happened. Now, let's talk about the biggest mystery of all, the horse itself. Despite decades of archaeological excavations, no evidence of a giant wooden horse has ever been found. Of course, that's not necessarily surprising. Wood decomposes. Over 3,000 years, a wooden structure would almost certainly disappear completely. Still, historians have developed several theories. The first theory is the simplest. The horse never existed. It was invented as a symbolic story representing clever strategies rather than a literal event. Ancient storytellers often used powerful symbols to teach lessons about intelligence overcoming strength. The second theory is that the horse wasn't a horse at all. Some historians think it may have been a battering ram. Ancient siege machines were sometimes covered with animal hides and occasionally named after animals. Over centuries, the stories could have been transformed into a literal horse. Another fascinating theory suggests the horse represented an earthquake. This sounds strange at first, but in Greek mythology, the god Poseidon ruled both horse and earthquakes. If an earthquake damaged Troy's walls, later generations may have described the city being destroyed using Poseidon's symbol, the horse. In other words, the horse may have been poetic language rather than an actual object. There's another possibility. Perhaps there really was some type of trick involving a hidden group of soldiers, but over hundreds of years of oral storytelling, each generation made the story bigger, more dramatic, and easier to remember. That's common in history. Real events often become legendary over time. Modern archaeology gives us another important clue. The city believed to be Troy had enormous defensive walls. These walls would have made direct attacks extremely difficult. That means the Greeks, if they truly besieged the city, may have needed some kind of deception instead of brute force. Military trickery has been used throughout history. Fake retreats, hidden soldiers, surprise attacks, psychological warfare. So while the giant horse itself remains unproven, the idea that deception played a role in an ancient siege isn't unrealistic at all. Today, most historians land somewhere in the middle. They generally agree on 3 things. First, a real city called Troy existed. Second, there is good archaeological evidence that the city experienced a violent destruction during the late Bronze Age. And third, the exact stories passed down through Greek mythology almost certainly became embellished over centuries of oral storytelling. That means the Trojan Horse sits as one of the most famous history's gray areas. Not proven facts, not proven fiction. Instead, it's a legend that may preserve the memory of a real historical conflict. The influence of the Trojan horse extends far beyond ancient Greece. Today, the phrase Trojan horse describes anything that appears harmless but secretly hides danger. In cybersecurity, a Trojan horse is malicious software disguised as something safe, tricking users into letting them inside their computers. Businesses, militaries, and governments still study deception as one of the most powerful strategies tools ever used. Whether the horse was real or symbolic, its lessons have survived for over 3,000 years. Sometimes, the greatest threat isn't the enemy standing outside your walls. It's the one you willingly invite inside. So, was the Trojan horse real? The honest answer is no one knows. There is no archaeological evidence proving that the giant horse existed, but there is strong evidence that Troy was a real city. There is evidence that it suffered destruction around the right period, and there are many reasons historians believe the famous legend could contain a kernel of historical truth wrapped inside centuries of storytelling. That's what makes the Trojan horse so fascinating. It exists at the crossroads of mythology, archaeology, history, and human imagination, And even after more than 3,000 years, we're still trying to unlock the truth hidden inside the horse. This has been the 10-Minute Mentor. If you learned something new today, be sure to like, follow, and share this video with someone who loves learning too. From history and literature to science and math, we turn big ideas into quick, fascinating lessons. Because there's always something new to discover, and sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones hidden in plain sight. See you in the next lesson.